Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for our first FashMash Pioneers event of 2022. And what a way we are kicking it off by talking about revolution and action. For those of you who don't know, FashMash as a community of change makers is all about facilitating a space for dialogue about the transformation that's needed. We're delighted then to have one of the foremost leaders in sustainability joining us this evening to share her thoughts and ideas on exactly that, Orsola De Castro. Before we get into more information about the discussion you're going to hear, however, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Klaviyo, who have joined us for another year here at FashMash. Klaviyo is an e-commerce marketing platform supporting brands such as Fenty, Living Proof and Skims. Whether you're an entrepreneur, part of an SME, or you work within a marketing team at a multinational brand, Klaviyo aims to give you everything you need for powerful email marketing and personalized web experiences. We highly recommend you give it a go. Just visit klaviyo.com/fashmash. That's klaviyo.com/fashmash for your free trial. Now, if 2021 was fashion's year of raising ambitions, from COP26 pledges to new brand commitments, then 2022 must be a year of realizing them. Action is our operative word, and collective action is a central part of that. I am delighted, therefore, to introduce Orsola, co-founder of Fashion Revolution, author of new book, Loved Clothes Last, and of course, one of the original thought leaders in this space, long before sustainability did indeed even become fashionable itself. We all know, I presume if you're here, you know, that the industry is built on low wages and fossil fuels. Many brands now focus on decarbonisation, but this cannot be the silver bullet to resolve every environmental challenge, especially when it so often comes at the detriment of social factors. These interconnected challenges are something Orsola has championed for years. In 1997, she founded From Somewhere, a label designing clothes made entirely from pre-consumer waste. In 2006, she co-founded the British Fashion Council pioneering initiative Estethica, London Fashion Week's showcase for labels designing sustainably. And in 2013, with Carrie Summers, she founded Fashion Revolution, marking the Rana Plaza tragedy. Raising public awareness of the continuing social and environmental catastrophes in our global fashion supply chain, Fashion Revolution has become a global campaign with participation in over 60 countries around the world. Clearly, there is so much to talk about this evening. I'm sure many of you will have questions too, so please don't forget to use the Q&A box this evening accordingly. We will come to those at the end. And do post any of your own thoughts on social using the hashtag FashMash. Without further ado, that's enough from me. Let's please welcome Orsola and my co-founder, Rosanna, to our virtual stage.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Orsola. And thank you, Rachel, for introducing Orsola so beautifully for us. I'm personally so excited, Orsola, to be interviewing you. I've been wanting to interview you for ages. I read Orsola's book last summer, and I went back to it this weekend, and there were more pencil annotations than non-pencil annotations, which made it quite hard for a quick recap. Lots of folded down corners. And I also worked with Orsola when I was at the British Fashion Council, and she obviously launched Estethica, as Rachel mentioned, back in 2006. So we go quite far back. There's so much I'd like to ask you, Orsola, and obviously I want to leave time for everyone who also has their own questions in our audience. So let's get right into it. A little bit of context this year, as Rachel was mentioning, everybody is seeing, or everybody is hoping that this might be a year of action after lots of pledges and plans. Do you think that this year is going to be the year for businesses and individuals to realize their goals and up their game in sustainability?
Well, I think it really depends where you're looking at it from. I mean, you know, when we look at, say, mainstream and big brands that I can remember, it's been the year that they should have done it for approximately 10 to 15. So I am thinking that we're a little bit late. But what we are seeing is, on the other hand, a real new crop of practitioners and designers who very definitely are making a marked change every year. With each coming year, this improves. There's more of them, their solutions are better, and they have further influence. You know, let's not forget that, you know, people working in brands are people. So it's a bag of mixed things. I can certainly tell you that I believe that purpose is rising everywhere I look, and that the ground is much more fertile for the growth that you and I have been waiting to see for a number of years already.
Yeah.
So
that's really promising. I mean, the Fashion Revolution, this high impact global campaign that you co-founded so brilliantly back in 2013, it's been a while, and yet it still feels to me, and this I find a lot through consulting work, that garment workers' rights and wages are hidden behind a smokescreen of carbon footprint and toxic-free dyes and special materials. Are brands starting to catch up and reprioritize, in your opinion? And when I say reprioritize,
I don't think when it comes to fair,
to the environmental.
Yeah. So I think there's always been a signature when it comes to, you know, the topics that they follow. I mean, you know, the high street tends to work more around the social elements. Luxury has traditionally always focused on the environment, but I don't think that's really the issue. I think what we're looking at is that the majority of brands are smoke screening and not telling the truth. So at the end of the day, it's very easy nowadays. You have to assume that what they're saying isn't necessarily what they're actually committed to, and go behind and look for, you know, for what's missing. And at the end of the day, you will always see that it's pretty much the same things that are missing. And that's respect for people by paying them a living wage and allowing them to unionize within their workplace, and the abuse of natural resources and the pollution and the toxicity that you mentioned. I think what is interesting is that with Fashion Revolution, we've been talking about the two things happening at the same forever. For us, it's not a social or an environmental issue. You can't about one without addressing the other.
Yeah.
You know for a fact that if a brand only focused on environmental issues and not at all on their people, that would be, you know, dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And the truth is that right now, brands are operating dysfunctionally when it comes to these commitments. They're putting plasters, but they're not addressing the cause.
I really think that plaster metaphor is fantastic. And what you just said reminded me of I went to listen to Orsola at Wimbledon Book Fair back in the summer. And one of the members of the audience, his impression was, and his question to you was, luxury do pretty well, right? It's the high street we need to focus on. And I think you had a very profound way of putting that actually it's across the industry. Across the industry.
I mean, you know, they have very different impacts when it comes to the way that they operate. And, you know, I know, and I don't want to get back into the conversation of, you know, but luxury is nevertheless less impactful. I mean, you know, I do understand exactly when we're talking about quantities that people tend to keep a luxury product for a long time, while the disposability of fast fashion, I mean, you know, of course, there is an issue there. But at the end of the day, both luxury and high streets aren't paying their garment workers a living wage. Neither luxury nor the high street are 100% radically transparent over their practices. So, you know, we can all talk about this forever and ever, but if we don't see the evidence, what do we know? So first of all, need to see that evidence. If I see that the luxury really does, or certain luxury houses really do pay all of their supply chain workers a fair and dignified wage, then yes, we can say luxury is doing more. But right now, I don't believe anybody is doing enough. I think, again, the terrain is fertile, and inevitably what we will witness, which I'm awaiting for with, trepidation, is a shift of the guard. The people that run many of the mainstream or high street brands or airport brands, whatever you want to call them, this fauna of mainstream, which is always the same people, that's happening. A shift is happening in terms of the age of the people that are entering brands and growing within these brands. And I believe that that will be a very natural shift that will occur when the generational changes as well.
Mm-hmm. Talking of the designer space, I loved and I was really thrilled to see what high engagement your post got last week on Instagram. It was about Fashion Month, which is starting in New York, although it kind of feels like it never ends. And to quote your take on these fashion weeks, for those in our audience who didn't see it, you said, "There are days when I think, why bother? When I am dwarfed by the magnitude of it all and by my own presumption that what I say or do makes change." How do you feel? How do you deal with that feeling of, I suppose, apathy of can I make a difference from revolutionary action, which I'm sure so many of the audience can associate with?
Well, yeah, it's a really tricky one because also I've been in this space for a really long time. So I've had various grades, or should I say various shades of apathy and despair or massive enthusiasm and belief. I think what is important, though, is that, we acknowledge that, especially as activists, that we are just a tiny vehicle that moves with the wind in a way. I mean, it's very easy to look at it just from our perspective and imagine that what we do really does have the profound changes that we wish to see. It doesn't necessarily happen that way. But when I write this is also to somehow comfort myself and remind myself that, okay, I am a huge activist in the sense that the organization I co-founded is huge, but that post was really to remind myself that, one mentoring over a brand new emerging designer during London Fashion Week, potentially, that's more impactful than, months or years of campaigning. And when I say, that I've had enough or the magnitude of it all, my solution is when I feel the magnitude, focus on the tiny. And I do believe this constantly and have throughout my career. Fashion Revolution, if you think about it, is very much a movement from the bottom up. We weren't ever the kind of celebrity-led organization and so on. So yeah, when it feels too big, go back to really, really loving and appreciating the small.
That's fantastic. And that's actually a really brilliant way to view life as well. So thank you for... it works really well. And is it, talking of Fashion Month, which everybody thought the pandemic was going to transform for us all, is it surprising to you how quickly the industry has reverted to business as usual?
No, not at all. I mean, and this is something I've said throughout the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic, I think it has installed and it has somehow instigated changes, but it has also instigated and installed the worst in us, which is let's roll straight back to what we knew better, and the fashion brands have a renewed impetus to sell more. So, I didn't expect there to be massive changes. I think the changes are structural and cultural, and what we've witnessed during COVID will be slow seeping, but it is seeping. I think that many of the conversations that we were trying to have, in the early years of Fashion Revolution became very simple. I mean, when people are concerned about, say, the fashion industry's racism, I mean, now I can literally just say, well, you're wearing it. Because obviously, if you're wearing a piece that is made by somebody that is, exploited on the other side of the planet, it's likely that that person is a woman, a young woman of color. So, all of these conversations suddenly became, more communities were open to be more experiment and come up with solutions because of trauma. There was more sharing of trauma during COVID. And I think that is a possibly a slow seeping change that will affect younger generations very deeply. A lot of people looked at their wardrobes during COVID and thought, why on earth do I have so much and wear so little? So I also think that would have hit people as they looked at their habits during COVID.
And that's actually why it wasn't planned, but your book was terribly well timed in terms of its publication date, wasn't it? It was a gift.
That was unbelievable. Actually, I wrote the book in 2019, so before COVID, and then I sent it to my editor the week that Milan went into lockdown. And then I did the latest edit, but I didn't have to do much work after the first manuscript. That was only I had 1 week in May in which to finish the final version. And when I first met my editor at Penguin Life, we thought this book is going to be really niche, definitely going to be really niche. And then by the time that it came out, it was almost like everybody were having those kind of conversations. I mean, certain things the piece I also wanted to include much more in the book, which was around feminism and the patriarchy, something I feel that I can speak and write at length about. We said, no, that's probably going to be too far out for this audience, and so yes, sadly fortuitous.
Very, and I mean, I'm just thinking of the front of the book, which says, India Night, the most important book you will read this year, which I think just says it all, doesn't it? I just love that it's gone from being a niche tome to the most important book you will read this year. So that's
it came from India is even more blissful.
Exactly. She's such a fantastic writer.
She and I were friends when we were 16. And so in the second book, if I do get to write the second book, which I'm starting, but there's certainly a very funny story of myself and India, walking down the King's Road wearing matching outfits from Fiorucci, put it that way. But yeah, no, it was an incredible. I had the people that read the book before it was published really got it. And I was a first-time writer. So for me, the process of hearing those voices of my peers and the people that read it before publication was the most terrifying moment in my life when we sent the book out and I could feel, these kind of groups of people. I could feel them reading it. It was just like, I want to be under my bed. But their reaction to the book was what gave me a huge confidence after.
Good. Before we move away slightly from Fashion Month, I just wondered if you could share with everyone your take on, I'm sure everybody saw because it was on the cover of so many newspapers, Charlotte Casaraghi on the show, or the show jumper and European aristocrat on the horse at the Chanel Couture show a couple of weeks ago. What was your take on that, Orsola?
I mean, what can I say? I feel really guilty because I always end up blasting Chanel for being about as relevant as something, it's so old, isn't it? So old. Why would she put herself in that light at her age? I mean, I didn't really feel that much for the horse. The horse was my sort of third, worry in many ways. I just found the message is this what we should be aspiring to? Yeah. Is this what, at this day and age, with all that we're facing, with all the conversations that are happening, all the topics that we really need to get a hold of in order to make some changes, and you're putting somebody on a horse, a slightly sprinkly jacket. I mean, if anything, let's look at what Valentino did that was so much more relevant. And for me, like the medicine that killed the Chanel. But, he just paraded these incredibly beautiful clothes on some very normal, wonderful looking people. And it had exactly the effect that it should have had. The clothes just sang. They were singing and duetting as they came out. Chanel, what did you see but the horse?
Exactly.
Clothes, what was she wearing? Forgot.
Yeah.
Completely forgot. So that was my take on that. But I have to say, before we move away from Fashion Month, the brilliant event during Fashion Month is actually opening next weekend in Stratford at the E20 Lab, and it's with Get Living and Future City. And we're showcasing the work of 15 really brilliant designers that really don't need horses in order to really showcase their product, their purpose, the purpose behind the product, and the way that they're making. We're calling it a showcase with a difference. It's part of our Fashion Open Studio initiative. And, if you want an alternative to the Fashion Month, come to Stratford and see what we've got to show.
I would love to visit that alternative. I saw some of the designers involved and there's some favorites of mine. And what we will do, everybody, is put a link to it in our social media. Perhaps Shedzi from the team could actually put one in the chat now if she has that available too.
Otherwise, just put the @Fashion Open Studio Instagram, and it's bombarded
to that, and all info will be there. You see, this is the joy of a Zoom. We can link well as we go. Thank you very much, Shedzi, for that. On the brand side of things, this hugely competitive domain, and I did mention the cover of the papers because they do compete for media coverage along with the consumer pocket, along with stockists. How can brand commitments that we mentioned at the very start of when we were chatting, how can they actually be applied practically?
Well, again, it very much depends on the size. I do think that we're facing a slightly kind of dinosaur stroke meteorite situation at the moment, and that, the size of this industry is not sustainable. It's quite simple. Excess is not a word that we can keep writing into our future. We can't, and therefore no commitment makes any sense. I mean, there is no longer one elephant in the room. Let's put it this way. The elephant's had a baby, or the elephant's now paired. There's two elephants in the room. Because until we address quantity and until we address pay, I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? And, again, mainstream fast fashion is obviously built on a model of just quantity. But I mean, just again, let's look at all of the licensing and the infinite amount of products that inhabit the luxury space. And, when we talk about luxury, what do we mean? I mean, we're not just talking about those 4 or 5 houses that are all owned by the same people, but that premium layer, that kind of slightly, in between layers. And, we're talking vast amount of products made by people that are underpaid. And surely I'm not the person to speak about the economy, but right now we're making to waste. I mean, a lot of product is never ever sold. How can that make economic sense? I don't get it. So, again, it's easier for brands to apply, the plastering, rather than addressing the fact that we need to completely change this economic system in order to make it balanced.
Yeah, that's something that Rachel, my co-founder, is hugely passionate about and writes about frequently. This concept of degrowth, which is a concept that most brand owners do not want to confront. But at present, any sustainability goals are just outpaced by the standard profit and loss model of the industry. Growth, growth, growth.
Absolutely. But, again, I repeat, we cannot keep writing the word excess into our future nor into our budgets. But the reality is that it's degrowth. My other important word is redistribution. Yeah. Because the reality is that, we are seeing an industry which could produce a hell of a lot better, and where people could be skilled as they produce. And we've seen models and periods of times in which it worked. And I'm talking about the made in Italy. When the industry moved to Italy, they didn't move to Italy because we were pretty. They moved to Italy because we were cheap. And yet, a huge, an incredibly important side of the industry was born there that was based on dignity of labor, on quality of product. And of course, they moved away as soon as they found somewhere even cheaper. But it's not like we don't have pockets where it worked and that we could be looking back into. But the reality is that right now, a garment worker, particularly when it comes to the fast fashion sector, is not paid by the hour, they're paid by the piece. So there is they have to produce more and more and more and more. That inevitably leads to more and more and more mistakes. It leads to a life barren of growth when it comes to their own personal skills. So an industry that addresses that is going to have better quality of product, which is made by people that are better paid. But at the end of the day, when we look at profits and loss, if those profits were redistributed to create those ideal or better, more ideal working conditions, surely, again, I shouldn't speak about economics, but it does make common sense. And occasionally, you know, you have to also follow the common sense. Excess doesn't make any common sense at all as a system. You know, the more you analyze the capitalist system, the more you look at and say, but like, why?
And when it comes, I find often when I speak to brand owners or senior leaders in brands, their response revert to regulation and how there needs to be increased regulation. There's this much cited comparison to the food industry and regulation in the food industry. Can you see it working? Where would the authority come from?
So I'm not really the right person to speak on policy. My team is way better informed than me. I know that at Fashion Revolution, we do absolutely campaign for regulations in this industry, so much so that even though we've been producing our Fashion Transparency Index for God knows how many years, the first thing that you're going to read about the Fashion Transparency Index is transparency is just not enough on its own. It needs to be mandatory and it needs to be regulated. The problem with regulation, particularly at the moment, is that the majority of all regulations are self-regulation from those brands. So, you know, how do we trust them? But surely there are ways, and there will be companies in order to create that mandatory transparency and regulations that we need. I mean, when it comes to ingredients, for instance, the materials that are in our clothes, we launched our second hashtag or third hashtag, What's in My Clothes, which came after Who Clothes. But the reality is that we're miles behind industries who have an obligation to disclose what they contain. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, you know, you go to your Superdrug and you buy a shampoo and it will say no parabens and no, you know, I can't remember the PFTs, whatever the chemicals are. Now, can you imagine going into H&M and buying a piece that says, you know, this piece was made of polyester, watch out because each time you wash it, millions of microfibers will be, you know, released in the machine. Or, you know, this jacket is, you know, dyed with azo dyes, which are forever dyes and will actually never disperse. You know, we just don't know. We really don't know. So we're buying, you know, active wear, which is there for our health and personal growth, blah, blah, that sheds shits in nature. You know, we're sort of, you know, effectively compromised and compromising with each wash and each run, and have absolutely zero opportunity to actually not do that with conscious choices when we buy from our main stores.
Oh, it's so disheartening. And I do want to talk to you now more about product as well, which we touched on earlier. And one of my favorite segments of the book is the rise and fall of the Gucci handbag. And you compared to, because also it kind of affected me and what I was thinking about a Gucci handbag I bought in the noughties. So you compared two Gucci handbags that you inherited from your grandmother in the 1940s, and then that was compared with a Gucci handbag from the 1990s, and the deterioration of product quality over the decades was astounding to me. No, I was going to say products that last are integral to your buy nothing ethos. So how have we ended up here? It's so depressing particularly in the context of the Gucci handbag.
Well, I mean, you know, there's an actual reason why we ended up here, and I could tell the story forever. In fact, again, it's one of the things I hope to tell in my second. I vaguely talk about it in my first, but, you know, it's a cynical move to get us here. You know, this is why, in a way, for me, Love Clothes Last was very much a start, but now we need to really consolidate and understand the thinking behind all of this, because we can change that thinking too, if we really see the cynicism by which we were made to buy and how and what were the processes, what was the historical journey, what were the roots. But the deterioration of product, again, it's deliberate. And, you know, this is why I don't use the word luxury anymore. There is such a massive gap between what my mom or my grandmother would have called luxury and what we are known, what we consider luxury. And again, you know, we've lost so much around education over those products. You know, I tell anyone that will listen, I mean, why would anybody buy a piece of clothing without turning it upside down and, you know, check the hems and pull, there's a string, pull it. If it unravels, run or take it on please. But we don't have that understanding anymore. And in my book, I make a case that we don't have the understanding when it comes to caring for our clothes. We don't understand the fabrics as I was saying before. And this knowledge, this indigenous knowledge to all of us, because this is millennia old, especially for women, is really important, because we make decisions based on that information. And brands have deliberately removed us from this information, which we instinctively should seek. We need to know what things are made of in order not to hurt ourselves when they break, and in order to repair them when they break, and to care for them as we take them along us in their use. So the deterioration of product, the removal of product, the unemotionality of product, the fact that at some point magically in the 1980s and 90s, human handwriting on bags or clothes became shabby when it's the height of luxury, and machine-made fluor pink, all the same, became glossy. All of this was deliberate. It was removing us, cutting a thread. That's what it was, cutting a thread.
And at the same time, well, all of this relates back to this idea of growth and more, and you mentioned excess. We can't go on with that mindset. A lot of our members, particularly those who have new businesses and they're in that kind of first stage of investment, the first thing their investors want to see is growth, a growth plan, a business plan. They want them to expand their product range, to produce more. It's usually based on, they usually have kind of one to three great products, but they're pushed to expand that. How can growth be balanced with sustainability goals?
But very easily. You set yourself some objectives around that growth. Actually, my experience is that when it comes to young fashion designers, and I work extensively with young fashion designers, up until a few, maybe 5-6 years ago, the goal was to be a sort of Prada of sorts. Not at all. They don't, those brands, the legacy brands, these guys, young students or young emerging designers, they know that these brands are Coca-Cola. They don't want to work for Coca-Cola or in Coca-Cola or have nothing to do with Coca-Cola. They want to make their own delicious, freshly squeezed lemonade, and this has sunk. That there is another type of growth, that there is another type of way to reach that growth. There is such a delicious thing called slow, steady growth, which means that you have a business, you pay yourself, you grow every year as much as you want to grow in order to pay other people, bring in something new. It's balanced, it's exciting. It doesn't mean that you have to work all night until 6 o'clock in the morning and start again at 6:30 after 17 coffees. It means that you take other priorities in life. And again, why do we not consider those priorities as wonderful as they sound now? Because we've been told that they weren't wonderful at all. Because a bunch of people wanted to make more money, wanted to stay up until 6 o'clock, and had absolutely no respect or no care for the people in their supply chain. So basically, the majority of us are following a bunch of delinquents who started a system that really now isn't fit for future. So the people that should rebalance this business now should look at the mistakes made, but look at a different way of growing. It can't be that difficult.
There is so much there that I love how you've put it. The 17 coffees attitude. It does sound so dated now, and it reminds me of the Halston Netflix drama last year, with that old school fashion attitude that has become this kind of stereotype of the industry. And it's so fantastic to hear, and makes me even more want to go to Stratford to meet your cohort of young designers. I should never say young, but emerging designers, and discover more about their ethoses, because this is the future, and that's so promising to hear. from if we focus a little bit on the consumer now, and then I think I'd like to finish talking to you about this younger generation coming through. If you have this very revolutionary stance that I think it needs to not be revolutionary, but for many it is a revolutionary stance that repairing and rewearing is the most powerful step we can take. One of your famed quotes is, "The most sustainable garment is the one you already own in your wardrobe." And I loved the infographic you shared on your Instagram recently. Shedzi from our team will put it in the group chat. It was a brilliant infographic, and it is this idea that sustainability isn't spending money on very expensive sustainable clothes, or indeed on fast fashion's greenwashing. Why does the consumer have the impression that it is that, and that it is everything that the infographic depicts? Shedzi's just shared it here.
Because they're called consumers, and we live in a consumeristic society, so everything is resolved with buying. Buying is being called a retail therapy, like it's a form of therapy. It's not, and if it is, we're using the wrong, therapist. If spending money, parting with money, is supposed to make us feel better. So that's again, a cultural shift that needs to happen, because actually, when you keep, when you save, when you repurpose, your high is longer than if you buy something super cheap and wear it twice. So let's flip it. Let's talk at it rather than from the therapy point of view, from the drug point of view. So it's called shopaholic, like an alcoholic. I've written in my book that Marx used to say that religion was the opium of the masses. Well, fast fashion and cheap fashion, the way that we're buying, is our crack cocaine. We are displaying all signs of an addiction at this point in time. And consumers have been caught in this quite naively in many ways. Again, there is a point in history when the fashion industry moves far away and we no longer have our next door neighbor or our aunt working for the local, factory and so on and so forth. This removed no more an emotional connection. But what consumers could understand, if for them sustainability is about the releasing of funds, then to better spend them. And the truth is that, yes, it's true, sustainable design is more expensive than other design, but sustainable design is still quite a lot cheaper than, say, your average Gucci bag. Talking about bags, I just bought this one today from this designer wanting, so this was expensive, even for me it was expensive, but it wasn't anywhere near as expensive as a Gucci bag, handmade, every single stitch. This is luxury, beyond luxury. So if customers were to understand that if you identify these young designers and you support them throughout their career, not only are you likely to buy cheaper because you will be alerted to all of their sample sales, but there's a connection, there's a conversation. You can write to them and say, look, sorry, can you actually change it, alter it? It's like a whole new world of buying clothes that we've forgotten. So what I guess people such as myself are trying to do with something like the showcase with a difference is try and remind people that there's very different ways of buying, and that actually if you can afford it, if you are like myself privileged, meaning that you have a decent salary and you can afford gifts for yourself that are beyond what you desperately need, then there are ways that you can genuinely support this kind of raw and emerging talent. I don't give to charity, for instance. It's or very seldom do I, and only maybe to one very specific. But supporting young designers, paying for the work that they do. I could easily ask for presents, but I like to pay for the work that they do. I like the whole process of waiting, of saving, of knowing that something will come and how much I will treasure it. In itself, that whole process is brilliant. And you get hooked to that as much as you get hooked to buying cheap shit whenever you can.
And so I was going to then ask you about how we can shift communication around sustainability from sacrifice and guilt to one of joy, and this joy factor that has historically been associated with fashion. But actually, you've just nailed it. It's about shifting.
Lust. This is pure lust. I mean, pure lust. It's the difference between fancying someone for a year and a half and eventually bedding them, to actually not fancying them at all and finding you. I mean, that might be very, very joyous for somebody, but for me personally, the length that I wait for something increases my longing.
Yeah.
And I increase my longing, and it's very poetic. It's extremely satisfactory.
So if we talk about this younger generation, we've mentioned them in the context of designers, and also you mentioned how brands, that there is a changing of the guard. The old school white men at the top are shifting. Yeah. And I'd love to get your thoughts on Gen Z. They're a generation that fascinate me. Business of Fashion State of Fashion for 2022 report said that 43% of the generation actively seek out companies with a solid sustainability reputation. And yet I'm left there thinking about 57% remaining, and all of the TikTok OOTD videos that are served to me, which are of girls breaking down in kind of 15 seconds their outfits. And it's always the same designers, brands on rotation: Target, Shein, Misguided. Are we wrong to think that there is a revolutionary youth quake coming from this Generation Z?
I don't think that we are wrong. There is a revolutionary thing happening. It's just that it's not as eloquent or articulate as we wish it to be, because, well, first of all, these kids are running scared and they don't really understand the full picture. So this compulsiveness of buying, we can see it as a coping mechanism. I mean, clearly a coping mechanism. This is like, in a way, adults hooked to their phones. Whenever I look at my iPhone, I remember Fisher-Price toys. And, we're hooked on Fisher-Price iPhones pretty much, so that I can understand. But what is happening with these kids is that they are questioning the role of ownership. Okay. Because buy really quick, but they sell just as fast. And
yeah, that's true.
They really sell. So clothes that land on them, stay on them for a really short time and eventually leave them. So I'm very curious as to what this will look like with years to come. But at the end of the day, it looks to me like the fast fashion industry, to a certain extent, is making butter of itself. It's like the fact that trends are coming out daily, it's going to kill the concept of the trend. Who's going to suffer at the end of it? Fast fashion. Mm-hmm. The fact that clothes are coming so fast, they're being vomited in this system and vomited out just as fast by a generation that doesn't give a damn about owning anything. When these guys wake up to wanting to own, what will they want? They're not going to want the cheap stuff they've been getting rid of. They will want meaningful and purpose. So, I am, again, I switch from days that are positive and days that are negative. But this excess is now as visible as the litter on our streets, as the worst kind of, literally, offense to your eyes. I don't think that Generation Z and snowflakes are going to take this much longer before they turn around. And again, if it's going by the young designers I'm working with, I mean, they're treating found objects, textile objects, like, a resource, picking up, creating amazing things. That in itself is a real critique to the industry that they studied in many ways. The fact that they just pick and find and make amazing out of nothing. So I do believe that this generation is undergoing a very profound shift. And I do believe that there is absolutely there's going to be zero connection between the white men that we're talking about and the CEO of those same companies 2 generations after them.
That is very promising. And before we move to Q&A from the audience, and I can see if some will come in, but please do send more, everybody. I wanted to finish on a positive note, which you've actually kind of already just done for me. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but we have been running the FashMash Hope campaign for coming up to 2 years, and have been inspired by luminaries of industry and their hopes for the industry, from Baroness Lola Young to Wilson Oriema. And that brought us insight and optimism during a period we felt that it was so needed because it was the pandemic. But we now really want to focus more specifically on the actions required to truly transform the industry. So Orsola, to kick us off, I would love to know, what is the one crucial action you wish to see from the industry in 2022?
Pay your workers, all of them, all supply chain workers paid a dignified living wage, and, you know, sort of plan B, allowed to be unionized and therefore ask for a dignified living wage. First thing number one.
So succinct, so well put, and the plan B is also noted. Right, let's go to the audience Q&A. I'm just going to bring this up on my screen. So first of all, from Natalia Duttai, thank you for your question. She says, what is Orsola's take on digital fashion and crypto NFT hype that many fashion brands are now exploring at the moment?
Well, let's start from the principle, the fact that I am incredibly curious. And so I look at everything from that perspective, and anything that makes me feel that could potentially be bringing changes, I will look at with, you know, excitement. And when it comes to digital fashion, there is an element to digital fashion that I do adore, and that's the playfulness. I mean, you know, I could play around with my filter on Zoom. Normally, when I do Zoom interviews, today I'm being serious, but if I'm speaking with my team, I'll be wearing the daisy generally of the filters that are on Zoom. So I'm susceptible to all of that. Remember dolls that you used to cut the, you know, yeah, and just all of that. So anything that makes us play with clothes, I love, because it's instinctive. We want to play with our clothes. Of course, I'm aware of the fact that anything technological has an insane impact. I know very little about the non-fungible tokens, although I'm very interested in the concept, but I really don't know enough about their ecological footprint to comment. It doesn't sound that brilliant when you describe it. But with technology, with all the technology, and as I said, we do the Fashion Transparency Index, which itself lives in that world. If technology connects us with those instincts that we understand and is a way to somehow explore them further, then I'm all for it, like playing with clothes or, you know, transparency. We need to know where things, you know, why things are made in that sense. So I feel that we do need to match technological innovation, not just to the future of the planet, but also to our instinct as people, if that answers your questions. Tech is not really important.
No, but you've still made it very relevant to everything we've been discussing, and relevant in a wider context. So thank you. Titania Massaro has asked, thank you for this interesting interview. I would like to address a pair of questions to Orsola. First of all, in her point of view, how can we understand sustainability in fashion today? I mean, using sustainability still being a good option to characterizing fashion brands that are really concerned about positive impact, transparency, nature, fair work, and so on. How can we understand sustainability in fashion today?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's again, and one of the things I'm most proud of around Fashion Revolution is that we use our language accurately.
Yeah.
You know, sustainability, there's a dictionary definition for sustainability. So you can apply that definition to all sorts of different elements within a company. And, you know, as we said before, some companies are more focused on social and others are more focused on the environmental side. But there's very little that one can do to redefine a word that somehow has its meaning, really. I mean, what I can say around this question is that we need to analyze these words more more carefully and how we use them. So if a brand says, you know, I am sustainable, you need to really understand what that claim is. Yeah. Often people confuse transparency with sustainability, and H&M did a whole campaign marching on that and saying we're the most transparent brand in the world, because they know that people go transparent, sustainable, same as circularity. You know, it's actually really difficult to come up with a circular product. And so for consumers to be circular is very complicated, but it's not at all complicated to thinking about longevity, and longevity is what ultimately will lead you to a circular economy. So it's really trying to understand exactly what you are wanting to understand about the brand sustainability within that context. That's important. And are they making it easy for you to understand? Because they should.
Absolutely. And then the second part of her question relates to prosperity. Does talking about prosperity in fashion today make sense? Or how can we understand prosperity in fashion today?
Well, again, it's a question of reanalyzing the words and how we use them. I mean, you know, we talk about growth, but we never talk about prosperity. We never talk about abundance. You know, they're greatly different concepts. So, you know, abundance tells me that I want an abundant product, but also a bountiful soil and abundance of dignity for the people that make that product. So, you know, it's again how you define, and obviously prosperity, provided it is equally distributed throughout the supply chain, sounds like the most poetic thing ever right now.
And somewhat unlikely thing ever right now, even in 2020.
Unlikely thing ever right now, exactly.
Right, next question from Lucy O'Connor. Thank you, Lucy, for your question, and thank you, Tatiana, for yours. What is Orsola's take on the longevity of shopping events such as Black Friday and Singles Day in China? I'm doing my dissertation on this very topic.
Oh man, those are the ones that kill me, absolutely kill me. For the sheer, that's when I get snowed by the sheer abundance of it all. So I've got a really weird thing with sales, though, you see, because when I was a designer, I had a shop in Portobello Road, and one side of the street was very wealthy, but it was very old days, and the other side of my Portobello was right next to Goulburn Road. The other side of the street had a very different type of inhabitant, very different type of families and people living there. And for me, being on sales meant that everybody could afford my product. So I don't you know, I'm not one of those people that says I never go on sale. I know a lot of young designers do so, but for me, actually being on sale can be an act of generosity. And I've often said to people, you know, if the difference between having a really, really, really good washing machine and a slightly shitty washing machine is waiting until the sales come, then wait until the sales come. But obviously, the way that we're living, Black Friday and Singles Day, is just an abomination of anything remotely like that. And again, it completely shows this gigantification, this dinosauric dimensions that this industry has taken, that even something as simple as, you know, buying something when you can afford it has been distorted to the extent that it has.
I am going to rush through some questions now because we have suddenly got lots of questions through all at the same time. I don't know if I had a delay. So, right, in the hot seat, Orsola, first of all, Emily Tan. Does Orsola have any advice for young, independent, ethical and sustainable designers competing in a sea of established and funded brands?
Well, first of all is look at the actual meaning of the word compete. Because compete, when you look at competere from the Latin, it doesn't mean one against the other, it means together. It means doing things together of the thing or the all. So just check that definition, because that in itself is helpful. Often the people that you're competing against are your truest friends. So there's safety in numbers. And while it is something like 40 mainstream brands that control something like 95% of the market, never really quote me on statistics, but something around that, then you will see that the visibility that young brands sticking together, working together, creating together, co-creating, sharing studios, doing pop-up, joining forces. That's incredibly important.
Thank you. Again, just marching through from Lottie. Do you believe fast fashion brands can go down the route of longevity as their take on sustainability with credibility, and that this will avoid greenwashing?
No, they can't, because none of their products are designed for longevity. So although we activists have really played into, I mean, we've done many autogol, whatever you call them, by saying fast fashion is so badly made it doesn't warrant being repaired. What we have been telling to fast fashion brands is keep producing, you know, this kind of stuff, and we're just going to get rid of it. So we've played into our game completely. So, you know, for me, change of mindset. Fast fashion is simply made, which makes it extremely simple to repair. I mean, if you've got a beautiful vintage gown with a French seam, don't touch it. But if you've got a, you know, a Primark or a Zara skirt and the hemline falls, a cat could sew that hemline. No one would really notice the difference. So the only thing that brands like that should do is to actually put cheap repair stations within their stores. I believe that that's a moral obligation. I believe that if your business model implies selling cheap clothing that you know it's going to potentially last less than a better made clothing, then absolutely your responsibility is to provide just as cheap a mending service for your customers. That would go a bit of a way towards engaging the high street with longevity.
There are so many questions, everybody. I'm really sorry, we've just got more through, but we're not going to be able to answer them all this evening. So actually, I'm going to ask Samuel Ade, or rather state his question. Orsola, Samuel has asked how best to connect with you, because I'm sure lots of these questions we haven't been able to answer. They'd love to. Is it on Instagram? What is best for you? There we go.
Instagram would be by far the best.
Perfect.
And possibly not even a DM, just send me a comment, put flowers on it, because I'm a little bit dyspraxic. So grab my attention with something bright.
That's a very good idea, everybody. And of course, also you can always email me and Rachel, and we will do our best to connect if needs be too. So thank you for your questions. I'm so impressed by them. Just glancing through the chat, you guys should have just taken over and come up here instead of me. Thank you so much for attending and for your donations to Fashion Revolution. If you haven't had a chance to donate, the link is still live on Eventbrite, and please do so. Thank you to our brilliant sponsor of Klaviyo, who are with us for a second year, which is fantastic. We couldn't do it without them. So now let's finish on a quick fire round. Orsola, you're in the hot seat. Whatever springs to mind first, give me your answer. Revolutionary writing or protesting in the streets?
Revolutionary writing.
Handmade locally or designed by a famous creative director?
100% handmade locally.
I made that one quite easy, I think, didn't I? Vintage Gucci.
Yeah.
It's right there. I wasn't expecting that. That wasn't rehearsed. Vintage Gucci or talent from Fashion Open Studio?
Well, I've already got the vintage Gucci from my grandmother, so talent from Fashion Open Studio.
Perfect, good choice. London or Rome?
Well, that's my life. I was born in Rome and I came to London from Rome, so I'm afraid to say it's still London.
Well said. I back you there. A night in mending clothes or a night out debating over a bottle of wine?
Okay, neither.
Oh.
A night out,
yeah,
mending clothes, dancing over a bottle of wine.
Oh, you've totally reconfigured that. Excellent. Rental
The
or...
debate, I'm afraid, is my work day, so I don't do much debating at night.
So true. Rental or resale
Resell.
And then finally, 2022 or 2032?
Both and everything in between.
I love your response. Thank you so much, Ursula. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, and we will be back very soon.
Thank you for having me so much, and lovely to see you both.
Oh, thank you. Bye. Thanks, Ursula.